Anyways, Owlman is described as being about 5 feet tall, essentially a human-like form, but kind of either gray feathers or a gray fuzzy fur-like covering, and again, giant red eyes, much like the Mothman. And again, the graveyard in the woods around Mount Ann Church, probably a very creepy place anyways. But as I mentioned earlier, a colleague of mine, John Downs, has written a book specifically on the Owlman. And for those of you that are interested in this phenomenon, I would encourage you to pick up that book as well, because he really goes into a lot of depth on the Owlman phenomenon. Now, getting back to some of the more modern encounters, this is a creature with the colorful name Batsquatch. And the name Batsquatch is derived from the fact that the sole sighting of Batsquatch occurred right in the shadow of Mount Rainier, which of course is prime Sasquatch territory, for those of you that are interested in the Bigfoot Sasquatch phenomenon. And this sighting was logged in April of 1994 by a young man named Brian Canfield. And he claims that he was driving on this remote mountain road one night, and suddenly his car stalled out. And just as that happened, this giant towering figure descended from the air right in front of his car, and he described it as standing about 9 feet tall. He said it had a face kind of shaped like a wolf, bat-like wings, sharp teeth, yellow crescent-shaped eyes, and blue-tinted fur. Really, really strange. And this figure just kind of stood on the road in front of his car for a few minutes, and then it seemed kind of disinterested, according to Brian. He wasn't necessarily terrified, he just felt out of place. And then ultimately this thing took off into the air, and then his car started back up, and he was able to drive home, where he told his parents in a state of panic, and consequently it made the local newspapers there. So we have a lot of these kind of weird one-off reports or encounters with different flying humanoid creatures. This is one that was reported in 2006. It's known as the man-bat of Briggs Road. And this creature was sighted in Wisconsin, specifically near La Crosse, Wisconsin, by two gentlemen, a father and son, who were driving in their pickup truck, and they claimed that this figure flew out of the trees and basically dive bombed their car, and that it made this horrible shrieking noise. And they described it as looking like one of the vampire creatures from, you know, Van Helsing or maybe Bram Stoker's Dracula movie. After it left, or it had departed, they actually had to pull over to the side of the road, and they became violently ill. And the two gentlemen also reported that after they got home, for about a week or two, their dog would cower under the bed for no apparent reason. They were hearing strange noises around the house and poltergeist activity and things like that. This case was investigated by Linda Godfrey, who's a cryptozoologist in Wisconsin, and she's actually written a number of excellent books about modern werewolf reports, if any of you are interested in that phenomenon. This is one of the Mothman type creatures that was reported in Mexico prior to my flying down there for the Monster Quest episode. This creature was sighted by a student outside of La Junta, Mexico, Guerrero, Mexico, which is in the state of Chihuahua. And similar to Mothman, he saw this thing hunched down by the side of the road, and he claims that it basically chased his car and was peering at him through the window as he was driving at incomprehensible speeds. Kind of like Jeepers Creepers, right? And you like that movie? Kind of a Jeepers Creepers scenario. Okay, now we get to the final, I guess, subcategory of flying humanoids, delineation, if you will. And I investigated these for the Monster Quest episode as well. Since the year 2000, there have been many, many videotapes that have been surfacing from Mexico which appear to show human-like figures flying up high in the stratosphere. And unlike Mothman-type creatures, these do not have wings. They're simply man-like forms that are just kind of flying up, hovering around up in the air. These were first noticed and logged by Mexican UFO researchers. This one was filmed near Cuernavaca by a gentleman named Amado Marquez in February of 2000. A month later, one of his colleagues, a gentleman named Salvador Guerrero, filmed this figure up over Mexico City. By the way, you can find all these videos on YouTube if you really want to. These have all been logged by a Mexican UFO researcher named Santiago Uturia. And I actually worked with Santiago when I went down to Mexico, and he's very knowledgeable about these. This is one that was filmed over an apartment complex in Mexico City in 2005 by a student named Horatio Roquette. This one seemed to have some kind of weird light or device or contraption. And I think this one is from 2008. So, you know, many, many examples of these. I'm sure some of you have also seen the famous footage of the little hooded creature that kind of floats off of a mountaintop and flies through the air at an even trajectory. So there have been some interesting theories put forward as far as what these beings might be. Now, some skeptics have speculated that they're merely balloons, man-shaped balloons or clusters of balloons that people have released into the air, and that, you know, they're usually too far away and kind of too out of focus to really tell definitively what they are. But as many of you may know, Mexico has been really a hotbed of UFO activity dating back to the 1990s, when there was the famous eclipse and silver craft were sighted over Mexico City and filmed in many cases by many, many people. And there's an interesting tie-in there as well to, of course, the Aztec and the Maya, and the fact that there are allegations of extraterrestrial visitations dating to that time period. Now this is a kind of a creepy, cool case. This gentleman named Leonardo Samaniego, he's a police officer in southern Monterrey, and he claimed that on one night in 2004, January of 2004, while he was on patrol, his police car was attacked by a flying witch. Bruja, of course, is Spanish for witch. And we interviewed Leonardo for the Monster Quest episode. This is, of course, 5 years after the fact. And several times during the course of our interview, he actually broke down and started sobbing, and saying that he still has nightmares. When he closes his eyes, he can see this horrible witch. But according to Leonardo, what happened was he was driving down this road one night, about 3 o'clock in the morning on patrol, and suddenly he saw this black mass kind of floating out of a tree. And at first he thought it was just like a big garbage bag or something floating around. But as his headlights hit it, he could see that it was actually a woman, what he described as a hideous woman with dark brown skin and giant black lidless eyes, and that she was wearing some type of hooded cloak. And what's really scary and frightening is that she was floating in the air. She had not made surface with the ground. She was just kind of floating in the air. And he didn't know what to do, so he was terrified, so he began to throw his car into reverse and call for backup on his radio. And as this was occurring, when he finally turned around and faced forward, this witch had shot at lightning speed onto the hood of his car and was clawing at him through his windshield. And at this point, this was more than poor Leonardo could bear. He actually passed out. And a few minutes later, he was discovered by the other responding officers and EMS workers who basically, you know, brought him to. And he was taken to the local hospital, and they tested him for alcohol and drugs and, you know, psychoses, and they couldn't find anything wrong with him. So this made big news in Mexico. It was on all the local news channels, newspapers. And subsequently, some other people in that neighborhood came forward saying that they had seen this flying witch. This is Leonardo graciously reenacting his encounter. We were in the exact location where this had apparently transpired. And then as part of the Monster Quest episode, we actually went out to an area south of Monterey known as La Huasteca. This is in the Sierra Madre Mountains. Beautiful remote area, some of the most, I felt like I was on Mars or something. I mean, it was like the most uninhabited region I've ever been to. But it is believed that there are these flying humanoid creatures that live in the caves in this remote area, and this is a legend that dates back centuries. So we went to this particular area, and we climbed up to where one of these cave systems was located. This is our car down here, so you can kind of see that we climbed up maybe like 3,000 to 5,000 feet. This is my team. I had a team of cave explorers, spelunkers, guides. And then here I am inside one of these massive cave systems. And needless to say, I did not find any flying humanoid creatures. But it was still quite an adventure.
You changed hats.
Yeah. Yeah, they did. They don't let me wear this hat when I go into cave. I guess rocks can fall on your head and stuff like that. Okay. And as I kind of wrap up here, this is the most recent flying humanoid sketch report that I've received. Now this one didn't make my book because this was after my book had gone to press. But in September of 2011, this gentleman this was last year, September of 2012, this gentleman named Trey Austin contacted me. He lives out in Big Spring, Texas in the Panhandle. And I interviewed Trey at length over the phone a couple of times, and his story was very consistent. And what he tells me is that he and his wife were out one night talking outside, and suddenly they saw this figure approaching, and it flew right over their head. And he said it would have stood about 10 to 14 feet tall if it were on the ground. But he said it was a man-like figure with long flowing hair, high cheekbones, sunken black eyes, and it had these giant black, what he described as angelic wings. And he said it soared right over their heads about 20 feet in the air and just kind of looked down at them. And so, you know, the sightings continue. So where does this lead us? I really can't say. I mean, the only thing I can definitively say about these flying humanoid creatures, beings, apparitions, whatever they are, I do not believe that they are flesh and blood, obviously. The descriptions vary too much. There's really no foundation or basis in the fossil history or science, as I stated earlier. However, there is a real enigma here, because people have been apparently encountering, or claim to have been encountering, these beings, these figures, for centuries, and they still claim to encounter them. There's been some long-standing, there's been some long-standing belief in the world of Fortean literature and the unexplained that there could be perceivable connections between, for example, Bigfoot and UFOs, lake monsters and interdimensional travel. This is going to be kind of hard to wrap our heads around, but essentially, we seem to view different types of phenomena in different ways. Obviously, Bigfoot, I believe, is a flesh and blood creature. Some people don't believe that. They believe that Bigfoot is some type of interdimensional or extraterrestrial creature, and that's why we haven't found a body. I really can't argue with that logic, since we don't have the body. There was a man named Ted Holliday who was an investigator of the Loch Ness Monster. And after spending years investigating the Loch Ness Monster and other similar lake monsters in Ireland, Ted realized that whenever anyone was about to take a picture of one of these monsters, their camera would start malfunctioning. And no one could ever get a good picture of one, even though people claim to be seeing them all the time. So it has occurred to investigators like Ted Holliday and like John Keel, and at one time Lauren Coleman, I don't think he still feels this way, that there could be perceivable links or connections between different types of inexplicable phenomenon. Perhaps UFOs, Bigfoot, ghosts, spiritual, perhaps all of that is part of a larger tapestry of unexplained phenomenon that we basically just don't understand, because it's beyond our realm of understanding as human beings to understand why these things do happen. But, you know, it should be noted that in Pennsylvania, for example, in the 1970s, there were many cases where Bigfoot was reported just outside of a flying saucer, or Bigfoot would vanish into thin air as people were watching. So I'll take questions in just a second, brother. I'm almost done. So anyways, you know, I believe that these flying humanoid creatures are not of this earth. You know, as I mentioned in the book, many times there do seem to be connections to the UFO phenomenon. And the other underlying theme, which is very prevalent, is the fact that essentially they are perceived as being the essence of evil incarnate. You know, harbingers of cataclysmic events, death, destruction. In many cultures around the world, it's believed that the appearance of an owl outside your window at night means that someone in the family is going to, you know, die or become terribly ill. So I'm not saying that owls and flying humanoids are the same thing, but in many cases that there might be a connection or link, you know, between what we perceive to be in our natural world and what we can't quite understand. So anyways, I guess I'll wrap it up there, but I would like to leave the floor open for a few questions if anybody's got any points, comments. Yes, sir.
What about theories of the underworld? You know, like Greek mythology would talk about an underworld.
Like the hollow earth kind of theories? Yeah.
What about?
Yeah, anything's possible. I mean, I really can't, you know, obviously I can't prove, no one can prove really any of this stuff. But for example, Frank Ramirez, who I was telling you about earlier, my friend from San Antonio, he's kind of got on a lifelong quest to figure out what this creature was that he saw, and he believes that perhaps it came from under the earth, because he points out South Texas, for example, has these intricate cave systems, and as I pointed out earlier, you know, in Mexico they believe that that's where these creatures come from. So, yeah, quite possible. Yes, sir.
You mentioned dimensions in and on. what if these creatures, what we see is these creatures crossing over from their dimension into ours, and the effect of feeling sick and ill is being in that dimension for that split second or whatever, at the same time that creature is, and that's where you're getting that feeling from.
That's interesting. Yeah, I've never had anyone put it quite that way, but again, in quantum physics, and I don't pretend for a